let me go ahead and thank and acknowledge our sponsors, DC3 Dreams and Voice Astro. DC3 Dreams provides high-end observatory automation and web-based multi-user remote imaging. The AAVSO net observatories use DC3 Dreams ACP Expert for the bright star monitors and other programs. The AAVSO Photometric All Sky Survey project, also known as APAS, has used ACP Expert's AI scheduler to automatically acquire over 500,000 star fields, hands-off, at a rate of 1,000 square degrees per night. This has resulted in photometry for over 128 million objects in about 99% of the sky. The Boyce Research Initiative and Education Foundation provides online astronomy education, observatory resources, and research experiences to students, student teams, and schools in order to learn how to perform observations, conduct research, and publish their results in scientific journals, such as the Journal of the AAVSO. Please do check out their webpage to learn more about their work. Okay, it is the moment you have all been waiting for. Let me tell you a bit about today's speaker. She has had a long and illustrious career in astronomy. After earning her PhD at the University of Hawaii in Manoa, she became a postdoctoral fellow at the Joint Institute for Laboratory Astrophysics and CU Boulder, and eventually tenured faculty at the University of Toledo. Her research focuses on photometry and spectroscopy of hot variable stars, and she has contributed dozens of publications on those topics over the years. But it's actually a different one of her accomplishments, which I want to focus on today. You see, while she was at the University of Toledo, she served as a research advisor, which meant, among other things, that she helped graduate and undergraduate students learn how to write papers. Fast forward to today, and you will find that she is the editor of the AAVSO's journal, JAAVSO. All of this means that she is the perfect person to teach us all about academic writing today, and we are very lucky to have her here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce Dr. Nancy Morrison. Dr. Morrison, I think you're still on mute.
You're right. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And I would like, before we go on, I believe there might be a raised hand. There was a raised hand. Maybe it's gone. It's gone. Okay.
We do have a raised hand from John Lewis Verlici. So here, John Lewis, if you could go ahead and write down your question in the Q&A box, which you can find on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, please go ahead and do that. Right now, we're only using the raised hand button for taking polls. When you have a question to ask, go ahead and use the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, to write it down. So I think that while John Lewis is writing down his question, you can go ahead and get started with your presentation, Dr. Morrison. Okay, John Lewis says that there's no question for now. So any of you, when you do have a question, just use that Q&A box and wait until there's a poll to use the raise hand function. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm very glad to be here. I'm talking with a slightly different title because much of what I have to say applies to scientific papers in other fields than astronomy. But of course, it'll be focused on astronomy. I've been the editor of the Journal of the AAVSO for just over 2 years. So this is a very nice almost anniversary. Other aspects of my relevant experience are that I was the director of Ritter Observatory. And in fact, that's how I first became involved with the AAVSO, because I found myself using AAVSO alerts and data to guide our observations very often. So I thought, well, if I'm going to use the data, I should be a member. As Lauren said, I specialize in luminous hot stars, both photometry and spectroscopy. What that means is that I'm not a specialist in most of the topics that are published in the AAVSO journal, and I've been grateful to learn a lot in this position. So what exactly is a scientific paper? There are two kinds that I can think of offhand. The first is a review paper, which summarizes a broad range of existing knowledge and does not present knowledge, and usually does not present knowledge that's been presented elsewhere already. And I'm not going to discuss it further. An ordinary research paper presents new knowledge that has been developed by the author or authors in order to enable dissemination of that knowledge to the community and to enable other scientists to attempt to replicate the same findings, which is a very important factor in science. In fact, many of the things I'm going to say are in aid of enabling others to replicate your research. Now, brand new knowledge is difficult for the reader, and therefore it's the job of the author to make the paper as easy to read for the reader as possible. And much of what I'm going to say, again, is reader centered. The organization of a research paper is very standardized, and I will go into what that organization is shortly. Clarity of writing is paramount over creativity. Flowery language is frowned upon, well, not exactly frowned upon, but not encouraged, let's say. So let me say a few things about the act of writing itself. First thing is know your audience. And taking that advice, I want to do what Lauren said and get to know you a little bit. So I'd like to ask for a show of hands, which Lauren will monitor. And I should mention, by the way, that I can't immediately see raised hands, so she'll need to keep track of that. So first, I'd like to know who in the audience is a student, whether a high school, college, or graduate student, any level. I can actually see the number of people who raised hands, which is very nice. Okay, how many are teachers at any level, whether high school, college, university, or graduate? And I recognize that some people can easily be both students and teachers. For example, graduate students often have teaching assistant assignments.
I apologize. I just realized I was muted, but I was saying for the sake of those watching on Facebook, we've got about a little over 10% of the participants are students, and the same thing for teachers.
How many are professional astronomers, meaning that you get paid to do astronomy in some form, whether it's research, teaching, or administration? And how many would identify yourselves as amateur astronomers or citizen scientists, or whatever term you prefer? Oh, there's the biggie. Okay.
All right, and for those of you who are watching on Facebook, that was about 10% professional astronomers and somewhere north of 60% amateurs.
I want to say that is pretty much the audience that I anticipated, so that's great. How many have already published a paper in a journal where the paper is refereed, such as the AAVSO? Good. Well, I hope you will nevertheless learn something from this. And how? Go ahead, Lauren.
Sorry, I was just going to say, for the sake of people watching on Facebook, that was about 20%.
And how many are now preparing to submit your first paper to a referee journal? Okay, that's about 10%. Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so I did attempt to write for this audience, and I hope it worked. Okay, so first of all, here's some advice specific to writing for a technical research journal, which is by its very nature going to be somewhat technical. Omit material that can be found in elementary astronomy textbooks. Even when the readers are students, you can or you should be able to rely on them to look those things up for themselves. Things like the definition of distance modulus, which is of course, the difference between the apparent and the absolute magnitude of a star, or the definition of trigonometric parallax. And there are many other examples that I do run across in submitted papers. Okay, on the other hand, at the opposite end, avoid jargon, don't use overly technical language, and if you are in any doubt, define your terms. Spell out acronyms the first time they're used, and I'll give you an example of that later on. And never be afraid to state the obvious, because what is obvious to you may not be obvious to somebody else. If I'm giving you advice that's somewhat contradictory, there's a reason for that. And the reason for that, all of this is subject to judgment. So that here's the first place where it's going to come up, that even though scientific papers have a very formulaic approach in many ways, the organization is standardized, the language, there are certain rules about language, there's a lot of judgment involved, and even creativity as well. Okay, more about writing. Whatever organization you're submitting your paper to, and this would of course apply to many other types of document as well, read and follow all instructions. And here I need to interrupt again myself and say that when I have type in blue like this, that means that not that this is a live link itself, but that I have provided a page in Google Drive, actually 2 files in Google Drive, one of which has links in it that you can click on and go to more information about what I'm talking about. And if Lauren hasn't yet posted the link to that document in the Q&A, she will, because I did send it to her this morning. Okay, I got ahead of myself a little bit here. As you are writing, if you have large tables of data, we are no longer publishing tables that are longer than a page. In fact, even sometimes the page is too long. So don't put them in the middle of your text. They interrupt the flow of the text for the reader. You can attach them to the end of your paper, or just attach a short sample of what the table will look like, and then we will put the large table online where it can be accessed by readers or anybody else. Okay, first advice, prepare a professional looking manuscript. Don't hand in something that looks like a first draft, please. All parties concerned will have an easier time of it if you have something that is easily read by the referee. Don't forget that the first thing that will happen to your paper after I look it over is that it will be reviewed by a professional, usually a professional or sometimes an advanced amateur astronomer, but at any rate, an expert in the area. And we want it to make it as easy for that person to read the manuscript as possible, so that that person will not be distracted by elementary mistakes. And I have a few things in mind. Take care with section numbering. Make sure you don't have 2 sections with the same number. If you are using Microsoft Word, one of the mistakes that people often make is to have the text jump from one font to another. For example, some of it might be in Times Roman, and some other part of it might be in a sans serif font. This is distracting, to say the least, to the reader. The reason it happens usually is that you have pasted text that has been sent to you by a collaborator into the middle of the manuscript. But you can force that text to be in the same font as the rest of the manuscript by using a paste and match style option, which is available in the edit menu usually. That is, I know this to be the case on Mac computers, and I assume is also true on Windows computers. If anybody knows anything to the contrary, you're welcome to paste that information into the chat, to the Q&A, excuse me, and we will pick it up. Okay, avoid crowded formatting. Don't jam a whole bunch of text tables and figures together on the same page. And I singled out Word here because the other option that we offer, which is LaTeX, sometimes pronounced LaTeX, really doesn't allow you to do this. It exerts much more control over how the document is formatted than Microsoft Word. So for example, here is a screenshot of one page of a paper we recently received where this mistake has been made. And I trust I've made this small enough so that nobody will actually recognize the document. But don't do this. Space out your text table and figures. It's okay if you use 2-column format, that's fine, but make sure you've allowed plenty of margin on all sides of figures and tables. Okay, one more screen about writing. This is more about writing style and applies really to any type of scholarly writing. Keep it simple. Avoid elaborate sentences. And I say this even though I sometimes am prone to elaborate sentences myself. I should remind myself about this more often. Avoid excess words. I'm prone to this. I tend to avoid excess words, possibly even to excess, so that my writing is sometimes too compact. So avoid excess words, but make sure that what you say is clear. And if you have to add an extra word or two for clarity, that's perfectly fine. Revise, revise, revise. Again, don't send in your first draft. Sometimes it's a good idea to sleep on a draft before looking at it again. If possible, have somebody else proofread it. Another pair of eyes is really, really good. And again, in keeping with the advice to avoid excess words, look for words that add no information and cut them out. I know people who report having handed drafts of a paper to an academic advisor and have it come back with many, many words cut out. That's something that you should be doing for yourself. And I think I meant to and forgot, for which I apologize, to put anything into this about people who are writing in languages that are not their native language. That is, if English is not your native language, it is very much harder for you to do these things. We understand that, and we will give you all the help that we can. My advice would be make heavy use of a dictionary, but use the dictionary with caution, because sometimes dictionaries do not give you the correct translation of the word that you are trying to find. And the same thing could be said for automatic translation services. Okay, here's a topic that often comes up. What happens if you want to quote material that has been written by others? Quoting other people directly is sometimes appropriate if they make a really pithy, eloquent statement about something and you just can't say it any better yourself. It's sometimes justified to do that. Of course, if you do that, it must be enclosed in quotation marks and the source must be given. Otherwise, it's considered plagiarism with it, which is a breach of ethics. This type of tactic should be used very sparingly. A rule of thumb would be at most once per document. However, it's okay to paraphrase and summarize as long as you change most of the words in the material. State the material in your own words is the mantra here. Now, there's a somewhat different concept, which is sometimes called by another term, but I prefer the term text recycling, which is reuse of your own writing. This is okay in some situations and not others. It's not okay if the recycled text has already been published in another paper. In that case, you should really either rewrite the text or else simply cite the earlier publication. That would depend on whether how important the text is to what you're trying to explain. If it's observational procedure, people often write that the procedure is the same in a preceding document and then simply cite that document. On the other hand, if it's really crucial to the understanding of the paper that you are writing, then it's better to keep the recycled text except rewrite it. If the recycled text has not been published, for example, it's a school term paper or a grant proposal, then it's okay to simply copy and paste it into the document you're writing. Again, provided that you use the command to match the present style, format, and other styling. Okay, here's a good place to stop for questions if there are any.
It looks like we have a question here from James Bruton, who has asked if you can comment on the use of passive versus active voice.
Oh, very good question. That's certainly something else I could have brought up. Active voice is better if possible. If you want to say such and such a thing was done, it's always much better to know who did it. If there's more than one author and one author in particular did it, then it's best to give that person's name or initials or whatever is appropriate. So if it's one author and you want to use the first person singular to say, I did so-and-so, that's perfectly okay with me. If it's more than one author, then we is more customary and very comfortable. Sometimes passive voice is the most convenient thing, and it's okay if used sparingly. And I hope that answers the question.
I believe that does. It looks like that is our only question for now.
Okay, this must mean that I'm going on to a new section. Aha, okay, so how do you learn to write a scientific paper? I hope it's obvious that a 1-hour webinar like this one is only a starting point. I hope you can take away a lot, but you certainly need to do more. And I have a few suggestions. One thing you can do is attend conference talks, because they usually follow the same format. There's an introduction, a discussion of, well, I haven't given you the outline yet, but the outline very often follows the same outline as a paper. Read a book on writing a scientific paper. There are many. I'm not well enough acquainted with any of them to recommend them, but you can certainly find a book by searching online, and you can probably find recommendations online as well. I have some book recommendations to make later on, but not specifically on writing scientific papers. A great way to learn is read good papers written by others. Start with AAVSO, because although I may complain about some of the material that we get submitted to us, by the time it gets published, it's been well edited and is in good shape. So if people want, I can find a list of model papers to provide in that supplemental material that I mentioned. An advantage of the fact that it's in Google Docs is that I can continue to supplement it. So if people would like that, I can do it. Just put your request into the Q&A. And finally, write. Practice, practice, practice. You don't necessarily start your practice by writing your paper that you plan to submit for publication. There are a couple of other things you can do. One would be to write up as you go along. If you finish a part of it, for example, you finish taking the data, well, write up a couple of paragraphs about what you did as you took the data. Write it as if you were writing for an audience and not for yourself. And what you may find, of course, is that if it's in your recent past, you may include too much detail, more about that shortly, but at least you wrote it, and so you got the practice. Another thing you can do is keep a journal or a lab notebook, and here, this is different because you're writing it for yourself and not for an audience, but it's still writing. And again, as you write, always think about grammar, spelling, and so on. Okay, so here's the standard organization of a research paper that I keep talking about. Title and abstract, numbered sections, and finally references, which are not a numbered section. Very often there are more sections than this. I included analysis and discussion with question marks. Sometimes the results are sufficiently bare bones, and sometimes they require extended discussion, and so those sections can be added. So what I'm going to do is go through these one at a time, and possibly surprisingly, and maybe not surprisingly, I have quite a bit to say about the title and the abstract, because those are the upfront parts that all readers will see, and some readers may not see any more than that. For example, people like me very often skim through the tables of contents of journals. In fact, I get the table of contents of a number of journals by email. Even if I don't subscribe, you can still get the table of contents by email. And so then you see the title. So so the title is very important for enabling the reader to decide whether he or she is interested in the paper. So here's some discussion about the title. The title should be informative and also maybe attract attention so that the reader sees that paper in preference to the dozens of other papers in the table of contents. In the JAAVSO context, where we're talking about variable stars, the title should include the type of the star and the nature of the work done. For example, suppose we have a fictitious star called V222 Hercules. You could write a paper called A Photometric Study of V222 Hercules. Well, the reader's reaction might very well be, what the heck is V222 Hercules? Now, you and I all know that there is no such star, right? But if there were, you'd want to know what kind of star it is. So a better example might be, this solves both problems. One is light curve and period study. So it tells you more about what the author did, and it tells you what kind of star it is. But wait a minute, what's a had star? Before I was editor of this journal, I didn't know what a had star is. So it's really helpful if you spell that out, because people who have studied astronomy generally will know what a delta Scuti star is, even if they don't know what a high amplitude delta Scuti star is. So it's better to include some information about the star in the title of the paper. Now, yes, that makes the title longer, but it doesn't make it impossibly long, and it makes it much more useful. Okay, the abstract. Okay, I'm going to go through the abstract and then I'm going to stop again for questions, because the abstract should stand by itself, because journals such as the JAAVSO are indexed in abstract indexes, which give you the title and the abstract and the author list, and then provide a link to the full paper. So the abstract should be a research paper in miniature. It should explain why the research is important. It should describe the problem being addressed. What's the, I'm including the possibility here that the paper could be a history paper or a paper on education. In any case, the nature of the problem being addressed, the question being asked, or the hypothesis being tested. Sorry. Methods, just enough for the reader to appreciate the research. Did you do spectroscopy? Did you do high resolution spectroscopy? Did you do multicolor photometry? You know, things like that. An overview of the results. Usually it's not necessary to give numerical values, although people often do. If you have all this other information in the abstract, then it will be information rich enough without the numerical values there. And finally, a little bit about the conclusions and the significance of the results and how they will affect the field. And I see I forgot the blue type here. There is some material about this outline with more detail, and also with a good and a bad example in the supplementary materials on Google Docs. It's a separate file. It's very similar to what I prepared for the meeting abstracts of the AAVSO meeting. The concept is the same. Okay, any questions at this point?
It looks like we have two right now. The first is from Tim Stone, who asks if there is a standard LaTeX template or some kind of a starting point for a typical paper format with the layout and font and et cetera specified.
There is. It's on the JAAVSO webpage. Remember how I said read and follow all instructions? There was a link to the JAAVSO webpage attached to those instructions, and that includes a Microsoft Word template. It also includes a lot of other information. I certainly highly recommend it.
Okay, thank you. So I see we've got a question here on how to access the Google Doc. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little clarification on that. So I've got a link. I'm going to go ahead and post it in the chat one more time because I know that when people just join, they won't be able to see the past chat. So
Right.
that link right there, you should see it in the chat box, which you can access on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Go click on the chat icon, and then the most recent message is from me, and it says, here is the link to information hosted on Google Drive. When you click on that, you will see a folder that has a couple of Google Docs in it, and that is what Dr. Morrison has been referring to throughout this talk. So just go ahead and save that link if you want to keep access to it after the webinar is over. And
feel free to go ahead and open it up and follow along with what I'm saying. I believe the links in there all work, but there's no harm in having another person test them. And please let us know if you have any trouble opening those docs.
Yes, please do. All right, let's take two more questions here. So one from Giulio Vanini, who's asking, what are some good examples for including keywords in the abstract?
Oh, good question, and not one that I've thought about very much. You will find a list of the available keywords on our website, or a link to that list, and I think it would vary a lot with the subject matter. You could use a keyword for your technique, such as photophotometry. You could use a keyword for the type of star or stars, or types of star that you, now you can have more than one that you studied. Let me think some more about that. And if I have any great ideas, I will add them to the Google Doc.
Okay, thank you. And last question for right now comes from Gary Billings, who says that last time he checked, the AAVSO page only had a sample paper layout for Microsoft Word, not for LaTeX. Gary would like to know if there is a sample for LaTeX or if he should use the American Astronomical Society sample.
I think it would be great to use the AAS sample. However, developing a LaTeX template or sample is not a bad idea at all, and I will look into that.
Great, thank you. I think that's it for our questions for now.
Okay. Do I have more about the abstract here? No, I don't. I have quite a bit to say about the introduction. This is only the first screen on the introduction. Okay, the purpose of the introduction is to provide the context for the reader. You need some knowledge to do this, and in fact, some people think that the introduction is the hardest part of the paper to write. I used to advise students sometimes to write the rest of the paper first and then write the introduction last, which may seem counterintuitive, but in fact, by the time you've written all the other sections of the paper, you have a great idea of what the significance of the work is, what the context is, and you're in a better position to write the introduction. Why the research is important, that's one of the things that you gain insight into, why readers should be interested. You need to let the reader know what other research in the area has done recently, what kind of picture that builds up, and how this particular research fits into that. One of the most frequent complaints I get from referees is, the most recent citation in this paper is 10 years old, hasn't more work been done recently? So what do? Supposing, well, I'm going to get to this in the next screen. Supposing your research advisor, gave you a reference that was 10 years old and you've been working from that, how do you find more recent references? I'll tell you about that in just a second. The introduction wants to say how the research advances the field, and then optionally, you can give a brief synopsis of the other sections. In section 2, we discuss the observations. In section 3, we describe the results. In many cases, the outline, let me just say, if the outline is as simple as the 4 numbered sections I gave previously, then you probably don't need this brief synopsis. But if there are more sections than that, then you may want to include the brief synopsis. Okay, so the literature search. This is one of the most important parts of the paper and certainly a main issue in writing the introduction. And there are many tools available. Let me ask a question here. How many people are familiar with SIMBAD? It's a website. I'm going to ask Lauren to take another poll. Lots of raised hands. Good.
That's great. That looks like nearly a third.
Great. Okay, how many are familiar with the ADS, which stands for Astrophysics Data System? It's from NASA. Quite a few also. Okay, well, for those who are not, which is the majority, it appears, let me share my web browser screen and show you the Astrophysics Data System. Sorry, I have too many web browser screens open. Can you see this?
Yep, it looks good.
Okay, great. All right, there are a number of ways to search this on, and I'm going to show you more than one. The most obvious way is to search for papers by a given author. So let's take the example of the 10-year-old paper that you received from your research advisor. You might want to find more recent papers by that author. And the simplest thing to do is to type in. Does my cursor look like a pencil?
Yes,
Really strange.
I think, doesn't Zoom have like a whiteboard option? Perhaps that got activated accidentally?
Sounds like it. Do you know what I should do to get rid of it? Stop screen share, probably.
Yes, I would just restart the screen share.
Oh, what if I click that? And that, yes, okay. There's an annotate button there in the toolbar. Okay. So
Great.
let's look for, just for fun, papers by Stella Kafka. And you'll notice that there are a lot of papers here, but Stella is not the first author of any of them. There's one, but it's not a science paper. Let's go back and look for papers where Stella is the first author, and we can do that by selecting first author from this menu here. And now we get only papers with Stella as the first author, and it's a while since she's done any science writing, I see. It's all about the AAVSO. Well, she works hard. That's good. Okay, so here's a science paper, and it's 2013. So maybe she's not the best example, but you get the idea that this is a way you can find more recent papers by that author. But suppose you want just papers on the topic. Well, here a good place to go is the abstract and title. This will give you papers which have a given word in the abstract, the title, or it turns out the keywords. So for example, we might want to search for papers on a certain type of star. Let me take my favorite example here. Delta Scuti. This would search for papers on Delta Scuti itself or on Delta Scuti stars. So depending on exactly what you want to do, you might want to vary that option. So anyway, lots and lots of material here. If you click on the title, you get the abstract and the full list of authors. And if you click on the name of an author, you're going to get all papers by that author. So you can really get lost, you can really, I should say, not get lost necessarily, but have a fun journey through the astronomical literature. Let's go all the way back to Stella Kafka, just for fun. Yeah, here's the first author. Supposing you were still interested in Stella's work and you see she hasn't published anything recently on stars, but only on the AAVSO. I hope this is not too embarrassing to Stella. Anyway, okay, suppose you want to know about QU Carini supernova progenitors. Well, this is okay. That's not going to work for this paper, but here, if you look at QU Carini type 1a supernova in the making, you see that it's been cited 10 times. So what you can do is look up the papers that have cited that paper, and of course now you get papers that are in the future as far as that particular paper is concerned, and that's how you can find papers that are written by the same author but more recently than the one you have. And I must say that when I first discovered this feature, that this was really a flash of a light bulb coming on for me, because always in the past I could only do literature search backwards in time. That is, I would find references in a paper and look up the papers that were cited in that paper. And now finally you can search forward in time as well. Okay, so there are more searches that you can do, and I will leave it to your imagination to check out these other search options. You can search for papers in a given year. You click on that, and now you get the option to adjust the year. But I think I am done with the ADS. Are there any questions about the ADS before I stop sharing it? Check it out and play with it. You'll have fun. I see 2 in the Q&A.
Neither of those are about the ADS specifically.
Okay, great. I'll go back to the presentation then. Okay, so we did the object search or type of object, the author, and the citation search. So when you use this information in the introduction, you need to mention other relevant work, and that can be done in the AAVSO style in either of 2 ways, according to how the reference is used in the sentence. You can either have the author's name inside the parenthesis if it's what a grammarian would say would be in apposition to the work that comes before, to the word that comes before it, or if it appears naturally in the flow of the sentence, then just the year goes in parentheses. And that's the standard reference style in many, if not all, astronomical journals.
Dr. Morrison, if I may interject here real quick.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Could you see what I was showing well enough?
Yes.
Okay.
We could.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so here's more about the introduction, and then as you can see, I'll be pausing for questions. Okay, don't casually cite other people's papers, at least skim them so you know what's in them, because it's one of the frequently made errors. There are frequently asked questions, and there are also frequently made errors, is to cite a work that does not in fact support the point that you are trying to make. So be sure that you avoid that. It's very well to find a paper from a search in the ADS, but what if you can't access it because it's behind a paywall? This is a serious problem for many people, including me, who am no longer employed by a university, and I don't have access to the university library anymore. There is some help available. The journals that are published by the American Astronomical Society will be fully open access, including all back issues, as of this coming January, and which is a very an announcement that many of us are very pleased about. There is such a thing as the preprint archive. It's called AstroPH. There is a link to it in the supplemental material that I've put online. The AAVSO authors are also encouraged to put their papers in this archive once they're accepted. And the way you do that is that you log into the archive, create an account, and then you're able to upload your paper. I think it has to be in PDF. And this is, by the way, another good place to do literature searches. I am told that many scientists do their literature searches exclusively in the preprint archive. And so that's a good place to get your work noticed if you want to put it there. Of course, one of the reasons that you write papers is that you want people to read them, right? Right. Okay, I think that's all for this particular topic. I think that's all for the introduction. All right. Are there any questions at this point?
Yes, we have 2 questions right now. So first question comes from Mel Blake, who asks, should you not do your literature search when you're first starting the study?
Certainly you should. You should do it at any time, but you shouldn't stop doing it when you start the study. It's probably a good idea when you're writing the paper to double check that you have found all the recent papers, because sometimes it takes a while to do a study from start to finish, and relevant literature comes out at a high rate.
Thank you. That's good advice. All right. Next question comes from Yogesh Chavan, who has asked, what is the best English language editing software in your experience?
English language editing software. I don't have any experience, I'm sorry to say. I do it in my head. So that's another thing that I'm going to have to research and get back to you on.
Thank you.
And actually, let me make sure I understand what you mean by that.
So I think there's 2 possibilities for what Yogesh is referring to. One is a editing software such as Microsoft Word, where you assemble the document, and the other is a software that's like a grammar checker that verifies your usage of the English language. Yep. Yogesh, if you would like to clarify which kind of software you were talking about, we would appreciate that. Okay, I'm not seeing a clarification come in. Do you have an opinion on the best editing software that's Microsoft Word style? You would do the whole document in it?
I don't think I should give a recommendation because I'm highly biased. And furthermore, I'm a Mac user. If I'm writing technical material, I use LaTeX. But if you're using LaTeX, you need a text editor. And this is the third option for what the questioner may have been talking about. Something that simply assembles the text, allows you to type the LaTeX commands, and then types up the paper. Tech installations such as TechShop, and there are many others, and they're generally free, by the way, usually provide a text editor that enables you to assemble the text, as I said. I have another one which I use, which by the way, on both Mac and Windows machines come with their own text editors that enable you to assemble text. I have one that's not free that I bought for a relatively modest price called BB Edit, which has very powerful text editing features, and does have a spell checker and I think even grammar checker, which I don't usually use, I have to say. I do make typos from time to time, though, so maybe I should. But I will, if the questioner would be happy to clarify the question, I'll be happy to. Well, in fact, let me just make a point of researching the grammar checker question and see what I can find out.
Okay, thank you very much. I do want to ask for one clarification. You mentioned the software you use. Was that DB Edit as in database or BB as in baseball?
I'm going to, am I allowed to type into the Q&A? I don't think I am. B as in baseball.
Okay, BB as in baseball. So
why don't I I'll put that in the
Yes, you have access to the chat box, so you can go ahead and put that in
Oh,
there if you would like.
I do. Okay. Oh, so it's BB Edit, and the software company is called barebones.com. Barebones
Thank you.
software.
Thank you very much. That looks like that's it for our questions for right now.
Okay. All right, so section 2 of the paper is usually the one where you describe your observations and methods. And you would think that this would be easy to write because it's a straightforward description of what you did, and you know what you did, right? Right. Not always so straightforward, because the amount of detail that you want to include is a little bit tricky. It should be just enough to enable others to know what you did well enough so that they can replicate your results if they need to. So they need to know, how big the telescope was. And it's customary, partly for this reason, to describe, what telescope and what camera and what image processing software and so on. Certainly, what software you use should be described, but it's not. You don't necessarily need to describe, how you formatted your files, or whether you picked up the screwdriver in your left hand or your right hand. I'm giving an extreme example here. So, be careful not to include too much detail, but just enough. Now, here's another case where judgment is needed. Here's one where learners have, and even experienced people have, difficulty reporting, which is reporting error estimates or uncertainty estimates. And really, error analysis is one of the hardest things in science. And so you need to be very careful about it. I used to be fond of saying somewhat facetiously that, anybody can come up with a number, an answer, but describing what the uncertainty in that answer is not for weaklings. I mean, it's really quite hard. And that means that, for one thing, you don't necessarily take every uncertainty estimate at complete face value. On the other hand, it's important that it be there. You should be familiar with elementary statistics. Get a hold of an elementary college stat book or a high school stat book, whichever is appropriate for your level. I've given you a link in the supplementary material to an introductory book suitable for undergraduates on data analysis, and it's the famous one by Taylor with the train running off the tracks. And when you describe the uncertainty estimates that you obtained, it's important to use well-defined terms so that other people can know whether they've when they compare with your results, what they're comparing with. Have you determined a standard deviation? What is the scatter of the points around your fitted graph mean? The term scatter is not very well defined. It could be a standard deviation. It could be a root mean square deviation, which is almost but not quite the same as a standard deviation. You have to specify. Some people are happily specify confidence intervals. Well, 95% confidence intervals are customary, but you can't assume that that's what it is. You need to specify. Sometimes it's only a 68% confidence interval. And then you really need to describe how you did the error analysis, how you estimated the uncertainty in your results. And this is an often emphasized feature of paper that are describing observational results. Theorists, of course, don't really have to worry about this very much, although they do too sometimes, because model calculations make errors as well, such as round-off errors, which can accumulate. Okay. Oh my, I'm going way over time. Sorry. Figures. I'm getting close to the end, though. When you're presenting your results, you often use figures and tables. Figures need to have their axes labeled with physical quantities and units, and not just the units. For example, if you're showing a spectrum, the horizontal axis needs to be labeled wavelengths or frequency, as the case may be, and the units, which are very often angstroms or nanometers. Use of color. Be aware that not everybody can distinguish red from green easily. And therefore, it's important to, when contrasting different classes of data, avoid vivid reds and greens, because not everyone can tell them apart. There are accessible color palettes that have been developed and are available online, and there is a link to those in the supplementary materials. Avoid throwing too much material into a graph. Do not show 8 exoplanet transits in the same graph, for example. Minimize the amount of text in the figure. You want to minimize, as Edward Tufte says, you want to minimize non-data ink. And finally, provide a complete figure caption that explains everything in the figure, including what the axis labels represent. And in my next screen, I do have an example of a figure. Well, this is a little bit small, sorry. But maybe that just emphasizes the point. This is a time series of spectral results, which was not intended for publication. It was sent to me by a friend for data. And since this is rather small, I have to explain the axes. The vertical axis on the left is radial velocity, and the vertical axis on the right is H alpha equivalent width in very strange units, which are not important here. And so the green curve is the H alpha equivalent widths, and the two other colors are radial velocities of different spectral lines. And the point being made here is that the time behavior of the radial velocities is not the same as the time behavior of the H alpha equivalent width, which went up and went down again, while the radial velocities did very little. Okay, there's really too much in this graph. It would really have been much better to put the equivalent widths in a separate panel up above. You could still see the different time behavior, but you wouldn't have the same stuff cluttering up the whole graph. Published papers and articles don't usually need a title because the information about what's in the picture is in the figure caption, nor do they need this information at the bottom about what the colored symbols represent. And again, one of the things my friend did wrong was to use red and green to distinguish the data points. Of course, it was this figure was intended for me, for my eyes only, and I'm not colorblind, so it wasn't a problem in this case. But if you're publishing your figure, it could be a problem. A good rule of thumb is always to print or at least display your figure in black and white or grayscale, so that you know how it would look to somebody who doesn't see color well. Okay, any questions at this point?
It looks like we have one question here. It's from Giulio Benini. He asks if someone writes a piece of code to solve a calculation, is it necessary to add the code or a screen capture from it into the methods section of the paper?
Good question. The short answer is no. However, it would be a very good idea to include the code with the paper in some form. An appendix is a good old-fashioned solution. What we would recommend nowadays is to include the code in a text file and ask us to put it online in our FTP data archive so that it can be accessed by the referee for the paper or by anybody else who might be interested.
Okay, thank you. And then Yogesh Chavan has a question. Should I use general vocabulary or academic vocabulary?
General vocabulary or academic vocabulary. Go with general vocabulary, I would say, as long as you can be clear and specific about the content. Now, one thing about academic vocabulary is that it's designed to be clear and specific about scientific content, but it can also be inaccessible to people who are not familiar with the topic. This is another case where judgment is required. If you choose wrong, either the referee or the editor will correct you, but please don't be offended by that. Just view it as part of the learning process.
Good answer, thank you. Okay, that looks like that's it for our questions for right now. I would like to comment that we're running a bit short on time, so if we could kind of accelerate through the remainder of the talk to be a little more respectful for people's time.
Yeah,
be great.
sorry about that.
Thank you. No worries. It does prolong things for sure by having the Q&A included as part of the talk. So you do have some minutes left.
Okay, so here's a few words on the conclusions. Many people don't write enough in the conclusions. The conclusions should be more than just a summary of the results. You can reword your results, although not without repeating what you said before. Comment on the results, evaluate the results. Did your study have limitations, and how could it be improved in the future? And make suggestions for further work. If this is a very extensive discussion, then this could be part of the extra possible sections I mentioned at the beginning, namely the discussion and the analysis section. Okay, the references. At the end of the paper, there's a list in alphabetical order by author. It should include, there should be a one-to-one mapping between the literature, the reference list, and the mentions in the text. There shouldn't be nothing in the reference list that has not been mentioned in the text, and anything mentioned in the text should be in the reference list. The reference list is very simple: author, year, journal, volume, and page number. The journal name is given in a specific form. However, that's not really too important because our editorial staff can fix that. By the way, you do not need to give a link to the journal. It's helpful to the referee if you do, but that will not be published with the paper unless you're referring to a website, in which case we have to have a web page. There are tools for constructing reference lists, which I would demonstrate if I had time, but it's really pretty easy to do, and the links to that are in the supplemental material. My thesis advisor used to tell me that the reference list may be the most important part of your article because it will never be outdated. Some of the references may be superseded. Your research could be done better by somebody else later. It's not likely to be completely superseded, but the reference list is always going to be an important path into the literature for people who come after you. So please take care with the reference list. And I believe that's it. Enjoy writing, and please keep those questions coming.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Morrison. That was really helpful, and I see that we do have quite a few questions here. So first question from Conan McCann: do you need to have a PhD in order to get a paper published?
No. Very simple answer. I know somebody who, let me just get back into Zoom here. I know somebody who I will not name, who didn't get a PhD formally until he was well into his scientific career, and very well known around the world, and finally managed to get one in middle age. So what you need to, I mean, a PhD is nice, but it's not essential. In fact, there are famous scientists who never got one. It's great training to get one, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't put it down. But graduate students often get published, people who are on their way to PhDs. Undergraduates often get published. What you need is to be able to write and to be well organized and to pay attention to detail. And of course, to have done good scientific work.
Great advice, thanks. Okay, our next question comes from Eric Browens. When is a study interesting enough to publish? Specifically, would a paper be rejected if all it does is to confirm results from a previous study?
Again, the answer is no. It has been unfashionable until recently to publish papers that are simply replications of previous work, but confirmation and replication of previous work is, the value of that is getting to be realized. And certainly AAVSO would accept such a paper.
Right.
Again, the paper should have some appreciation, certainly acknowledge the previous work and have some appreciation for the context and explain why, explain what the relationship between the two pieces of work is and why confirmation is important. But yes, you can certainly publish such a paper. At least I wouldn't reject it.
Yes, Thank you. And quite related to that last question, we have one here from Robert Buckheim, who says that you've noted that the replication of prior results is very important to scientific progress. And he would like to know, do you have any advice on specifically writing a paper when the primary result of the project was to replicate a previous result? So for the two situations, we report verification of the result, or we report that the star is now different. So what would be your advice for writing a paper like that?
Write that. I mean, be straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
The tricky part, it seems to me, would be if you were in the process of declaring that somebody else is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to be careful. People make honest mistakes all the time, and if they've made mistakes, this should be pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
I can be diplomatic. If you write such a, well, again, in fact, this has happened within the past 2 years. If someone has written such a paper and sent it in to me in advance of refereeing, before formally submitting the paper, he sent it to me and said, what do you think about the tone of this paper and how it refers to another author? And I did in fact give him some advice to calm it down a little bit, which he did. And so if you would like to do that, I'll be glad to help out.
Thank you.
I don't know if does that answer the question?
I believe that it does.
Yeah, if you're just saying that somebody else is right, that and you're confirming their results, that's pretty easy. And you want to take note that yes, replication of previous results is important. If it's a variable star, you can say, and this adds to the length of time coverage of this variable star, which is usually very important because most variable stars don't do exactly the same thing in each cycle.
Yes,
again,
I think that
one of the things I forgot to do, I meant to put my email address in that supplementary document. I will do that. And if you have questions that you think of after this webinar is over, or that we didn't cover adequately in the webinar, feel free to send me an email.
that is a great offer. And just to remind everyone, especially those of you who have just joined, the supplementary information that Dr. Morrison is referring to can be found at a Google Drive link. I'm going to go ahead and put that into the chat. Go ahead and save that link if you want to refer to the supplementary information, which I highly recommend that you do. Go ahead and save that link because you won't have access to it after the webinar is over.
Or better yet, go ahead and open it and make sure it works.
Yes, do that. Do that. Okay, our next question is talking about figures. What do you think about using patterns instead of colors for graphs where you need a fill to be indicated?
Thank you. I meant to say something about that. I think that symbol shapes and filled or not filled are better than color. Line patterns are good. Anything that, again, if it's clearly visible in black and white, then it's good. There are certainly, don't get me wrong, there are certainly situations where color is highly appropriate, but a lot of the information can be presented in black and white.
Yeah, and it seems quite admirable to do so, not only for people who are colorblind, but also I understand that a lot of people print papers to read them or read them on black and white e-readers. So yeah. Okay, next question here comes from Jilin Yang, who has asked if there's any need to pay attention to the specific font and font size you're using when you're formatting your paper.
Not when you're, no, this is a short answer. Just make sure it's consistent and consistent and uniform font. It shouldn't be too small. We don't have any page limits, so there's no reason to use a really tiny font. It should be legible, right? But other than that, I would say there's no need to worry about it.
All right, thank you.
I should go on to say that in the journal's production process, everything will be formatted in a consistent manner.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. And then the next question, this one's from Julia Vanini, who asks if APA is a valid citation format for astronomy papers.
it'll certainly get you in the right direction. I should go back and look again at what APA is. But if it uses the information that I requested, which is author, year, journal, volume, and page number in that order, then it's fine. Again, here I didn't get around to saying this either. If your format is not quite correct, that will be taken care of in the publication process. The important thing is that the complete information about the citation be present so that the referee can look it up, or that I can look it up. And by the way, the citation tool that I did not demonstrate, but gave you a link to, allows you to search on the format that you want. It includes APA, but it also includes the astrophysical and the astronomical journal. So the astronomical ones would be preferred for AAVSO.
Okay, thank you. We're almost out of questions here, and we have a few extra minutes. So if you would like to show one of those citation websites, you're welcome to do so.
Oh, okay. Give me a second.
Okay, see your screen?
Well, I don't see it, so give me a minute here.
Okay, take your time.
All right, so here's Citation Machine. The other one, EasyDib, is actually from the same company and looks almost identical. I don't know why there are two of them. And by the way, this does have an error checker feature. As you can see, it says check your paper. I think you might have to have an account in order to use that, but you can create citations without an account. So you click on that, and let's suppose we're citing a journal, which is covers most cases. And so you're allowed to choose which journal you want. I'm sorry to say that if you type in AAVSO, nothing will come up. But if you type Astro search, then well, you have to go down a little bit, but you eventually get, oh, maybe I better type in a little bit more. Why don't we just go with Astronomical Journal and B, whoops. You have to not make a typo. Okay. Lots of interesting stuff here, which I didn't know about. Okay, the Astronomical Journal, let's pick that one. And okay, continue. And oh gosh, this is not, okay, journal title. Actually, this is not what I did when I was checking this out. But anyway, if you know the volume, let's see, 161, page 27. Okay, so here's the citation that it gives you. Okay, well, I'm doing this wrong. However, you can probably figure this out better than I can online. As I say, when I did this last week, it worked beautifully. So
that's the way it usually works. Yeah.
Right. Right. So it did give me a citation. I know what I didn't do. Let's try this again. No, I don't want to check my paper for plagiarism errors. I didn't type in. Let's go back up here. Article title. That's not what I want. Citing full article. Okay, I need author. Type much. Okay. If you type in the information that you need, that you should already know because you're going to put it in your reference list, author, year, journal volume and page number, then the citation will come up in the correct form. That's the idea. And I should probably quit while I'm ahead here.
Okay, thank you. I think sometimes that these sites and software detect when you're live streaming on Zoom and start malfunctioning specifically for that. Yes.
Exactly.
All right, and you said that
just as copy machines. Well, in the old days we used copying machines, and they always malfunction when there was a line.
Yes. So are the links to these citation generators, were those included in the supplementary information which you shared in the Google Drive?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So for those of you watching, you can go ahead and mess around in the site for yourself if you would like, using the link which I have put in the chat. Now, we have one more comment here on citations. So this one was also from Giulio Vanini, who said that he finds Zotero to be a useful tool to keep track of references and to format citations using several different standards. Do you know anything about those kind of tools?
No, and but I would love to learn more. Is there a link that you can put in the chat or the Q&A?
We'll see. Julio, if you are still there, could you please give us a link to this Zotero that you mentioned?
Or at least,
so
spell it.
I do have it spelled here, so I'll put that name into the chat. There we go.
Okay, I see it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And here is a link which Julio has just provided. Thanks so much, Julio. And I'm dropping that into the chat as well. So you can go ahead and
okay.
investigate that.
I'm sure if I had Googled that, I would have found it. Okay, great. I will definitely investigate.
Great.
You're giving me homework to do. This is great.
Yes. All right. We have a couple more questions here. One is from Alan Gilchrist. This is also about citations. Let's take it first. What if you need to give multiple references to papers by the same author in the same year?
The same year. Oh, I'm sorry. I know the answer to that. What am I doing blanking out? It's instead of just the year, you'd put, supposing the year is 1999, right? You'd put 1999A, 1999B, and so on, as for as many as you need. Okay, and I'm sure you can find examples of that if you look in our journal or other journals.
Simple, great.
There might even be an example in the instructions.
Thank you. While we're still on the topic of citations, we have a comment here from Olivia Cooper, who says Mendeley is also a good tool for keeping track of citations. So I'm going to put the name of that into the chat as well.
I've heard of that. Well, yeah. Well, there's constructing the citation for use in the journal, and then there's simply keeping track of all the articles you've read, which is a somewhat separate problem. Right. Yeah, I think that's what Mendeley is for, although it may also construct the citation. I've been in this game so long that I developed a homegrown tool which I simply use, and you know, I should also mention on the topic of LaTeX that there is a LaTeX auxiliary named BibTeX, which will construct your citations in such a way that you can use LaTeX macros to stick the references in the text with the author parenthesis year format. And it knows, and according to what you tell it, it'll know whether you want the author parenthesis year or the parenthesis author comma year version.
Excellent, good to know. Okay, now we have two more questions here about specific kinds of papers, about whether you have any kind of comment on writing these kind of papers. One is outreach astronomy papers. So how would you suggest, is there anything you should change about the format of the paper if your topic is astronomical outreach?
That would be more flexible. The same format can work, but I would certainly be more flexible on the format of such a thing. What you might be interested in doing is looking up a recent paper by Christine Larson, who wrote a very nice kind of semi-autobiographical, but also our outreach article. And let me just double check whether that was which issue of the journal that's in. That is in. That's in volume 49, number 1, which has already been published. So, but if you go to the AAVSO homepage and look under most recent volume, you'll see it under education and outreach.
Okay.
And that would be a good model.
And the other question about writing a specific kind of paper, I see there's 2 interpretations here. This question was about writing astronomy dissemination papers. So I think that could either be about outreach papers, which you've just answered, or possibly about review papers where you're trying to summarize some aspect of astronomy for the scientific community. So do you have any comments?
I think it probably means popular or semi-popular science writing. Like
that's
Sky
another
and Telescope.
Yeah, that's probably it, actually. So do you have any comments on that?
Well, that's not what this webinar has been meant to cover. I could give a separate, I used to do that, and I could give a separate webinar about it. But on the other hand, that was a long time ago. And so maybe it would be better to have a different speaker. Do I have any comments? Well, you know, the material in the beginning of this presentation, and by the way, I will put the slides up on the Google Doc in the Google Drive folder as well when we're done. Let me just add that to my to-do list there. But the same advice applies that I gave in the beginning. Avoid jargon. If you use jargon, define it. Use plain language, avoid verbosity. It's up to you how conversational or how, what am I trying to say, convivial you want to be. When I did it, I tended to write rather formally. And I think, to be honest, I wrote a little above the heads of the people I was aiming at. Again, know your audience. You know, think of somebody you know that belongs to the to the readership of the magazine or the publication that you're writing for, and write so that that person will understand it. Use plenty of pictures. Have I got the question right? Am I answering the right question?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right. And I think that was a good answer. And you're right that popular science writing is a whole nother topic, and perhaps we'll be able to do a webinar on that someday soon.
But as I say, I might not be the best person to do it.
I'm sure you do a great job at it.
Maybe somebody from Sky and Telescope.
That would be cool. That would be cool. Okay, and it looks like that is it on our list of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and put up the closing slides here. Let me just do that.
Well, thank you. While you're doing that, thank you very much for allowing me to go over. If Dr. Mata were here, I would be much more pressed for time.
Yes, that's true, but I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did, because I think that this was a wonderful session, and I really appreciated all of the interactivity that you worked into your presentation. I think it was wonderful. So thank you very much.
It threw off my timing too. I'm glad I did it, but it certainly threw off my timing.
Yeah, well, we made an allowance with some extra time, and I apologize for rushing you a bit there at the end. I didn't realize you were so close to the end of your presentation. Okay, so closing announcements. So first and most important closing announcement is that I would like to give a huge thank you to Dr. Morrison from all of us here at the AAVSO, because this was a wonderful session today, and we really appreciate your volunteering to speak.
You're welcome, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Great. I would also like to thank again our sponsors, DC3 Dreams and Voice Astro. DC3 Dreams provides high-end observatory automation and web-based multi-user remote imaging. The AAVSO net observatories use DC3 Dream's ACP Expert for the Bright Star monitors and other programs. The AAVSO Photometric All Sky Survey project, also known as APAS, has used ACP Expert's AI scheduler to automatically acquire over 500,000 star fields, hands off, at a rate of 1,000 square degrees per night. This has resulted in photometry for over 128 million objects in about 99% of the sky. The Boyce Research Initiative and Education Foundation provides online astronomy education, observatory resources, and research experiences to students, student teams, and schools in order to learn how to perform observations, conduct research, and publish their results in scientific journals, such as the Journal of the AAVSO. So, great news for all of you guys in the audience. Today's webinar was recorded. So, right at this very moment, you can find the recording on our Facebook page. And before very long, it's going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel, where it will join an ever-expanding library of educational webinars just like this one. I suggest that you go check out our YouTube channel. And if you like what you see there, please do consider subscribing. It only takes a single click, and by doing so, you will actually be helping us to increase our educational reach. You'll be making YouTube more likely to suggest our videos to others. That is just one more way that you can help support the AAVSO. Speaking of support, this webinar series is being supported by you, the viewer. So if you're not a member, join the AAVSO. AAVSO membership comes with a lot of benefits, including access to our mentorship program, our top-of-the-line photometry software, vPhot, and our remote telescope network. It's a great resource, if you ask me. And as always, we would be so very grateful if you would consider donating to the AAVSO. Every single donation matters, and every single donation makes an impact. We use all of your donations to support programs like this one and bring them to life.